In Jerusalem, on a single night, Jesus of Nazareth stood accused of two separate offences before two separate courts under two completely different legal systems. At the first, the charge was religious blasphemy, a claim about who he was that the Jewish council considered an offence against God. By the time he stood before the Roman prefect, the accusation had changed entirely. Now it was political, sedition, a claim to kingship that Rome could not ignore. Two courts, two charges, one night. One of those systems was built with more protections against wrongful execution than almost anywhere else in the ancient world. The other placed total authority in a single man with no obligation to justify his decisions to anyone. He was condemned by the first, declared innocent by the second, and then executed anyway. In the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire, the prefect investigated, the prefect questioned, the prefect decided the verdict, the prefect chose the penalty. No jury, no independent judge, no sentencing code he was required to follow. The procedure was called the cognito. It gave the provincial governor near total authority over the life and death of every non-citizen in his province. Fine, exile, death, whatever he decided was final. There was no mechanism to reverse it. We know what that authority looked like in practice because we have a scene. In the book of the Acts, the Apostle Paul is bound and prepared for flogging. He says 4 words: "I'm a Roman citizen." The commander stops, steps back. The text says he was afraid because he had bound a Roman citizen without a trial. 4 words and the whole thing stopped. Roman citizens were perhaps 1 or 2% of the population of the Eastern Mediterranean. Roman citizens had the protection of Rome behind them. Everyone else had nothing. No words to speak, no court to appeal to, no floor beneath them if the man with authority decided they needed to go. Running alongside Roman authority in Judea was a legal system built on almost entirely opposite principles. The rules for Jewish capital cases are recorded in the Mishnah, compiled around 200 AD, roughly 170 years after the trial of Jesus. Whether each specific rule applied in exactly that form is certainly debated. The instinct behind them runs through Jewish scripture for centuries before the Mishnah existed. Now, for capital cases, the hearings needed to be in the designated public hall inside the temple complex. Daylight only, 2 witnesses, examined separately. If their accounts contradicted each other, the case collapsed. A majority of 2 judges to convict, a majority of 1 to acquit. After a guilty verdict, sentencing required an overnight gap, time to reconsider, time for new evidence to surface. The tradition went further than procedure. The Talmud records that a Sanhedrin that carried out a death sentence even once in 70 years was considered destructive. Not overzealous, not aggressive, destructive. One system gave a single man total power and no obligation to explain himself. The other treated even one execution in 70 years as a kind of failure. Both of those systems were about to be used on the same man. The arrest came after dark, outside the city walls, away from the Passover crowds. Jesus was taken to the house of the high priest Caiaphas for a formal hearing before the council. Not the designated hall inside the temple complex, a private residence in the middle of the night. Witnesses were brought forward. Account after account contradicted the one before it. Under Jewish capital law, that alone should have ended the proceedings. Contradicting witnesses meant no case. The hearing should have been over before the central question was even asked. The verdict the council reached was death, same night as the hearing. Wrong location, wrong time, witnesses whose accounts couldn't agree, 3 violations of its own rules before the most significant moment of that night had even arrived. The witnesses had failed. Their accounts contradicted each other. Under Jewish law, the case should have been over. Caiaphas pressed him directly. Was he the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus answered in language drawn from the book of Daniel, placing himself at the right hand of power, a position the Jewish tradition reserved for God alone. Caiaphas tore his robes, the formal gesture of a man who had just witnessed blasphemy. It's also the gesture the Mishnah explicitly bars a presiding high priest from making, because it is the act of a man who has already decided. A judge who has visibly decided before the verdict is no longer presiding. He has disqualified himself. The verdict was death. The system built to make wrongful execution nearly impossible had just produced one, in a private house, at night, with failing witnesses and a presiding official who had removed himself from the proceedings by his own gesture. The council had its verdict, but crucifixion required the Roman prefect. Only he could authorize it. Only Roman soldiers could carry it out. That meant the case had to move to a different court. And blasphemy was useless there. A religious dispute inside Jewish communities was not Rome's business and was nowhere near grounds for execution. So the accusation changed. Jesus had claimed, they told Pilate, to be the king of the Jews. A political claim, a direct challenge to Roman authority. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not a loose translation. It was the charge that fit the only system that could still deliver the outcome they needed. Pilate questioned Jesus. Was he the king of the Jews? The response across the gospel accounts was something close to, "Those are your words, not mine." Not a denial, not a confession. Pilate found no grounds to convict. He said so in public. The man with cognito authority over the entire province, who could sentence a non-citizen to death and answer to no one for it, had just declared the accused innocent. Under that system, that declaration could have been the end of it. He could have walked away. He didn't. But he also didn't sentence him, not yet. He sent Jesus to Herod Antipas, ruler of Galilee, who was also in Jerusalem for the festival. Herod questioned him. Jesus said nothing. Herod's soldiers mocked him and sent him back. Pilate tried again. The Gospels describe him offering the crowd a choice, a Passover custom, he calls it, releasing one prisoner, Jesus or Barabbas, a man held for insurrection. The crowd called for Barabbas. 3 attempts to avoid the outcome. Then Pilate sentenced him to crucifixion. The sources don't explain what was driving that reluctance. They just record what it looked like. A man with absolute authority over the decision, trying repeatedly to hand it to someone else. The Jewish system had rules about where the hearings could take place, what time of day, how many witnesses were required, what a presiding official could and couldn't do during proceedings. Each rule existed because the people who wrote them understood something. A system capable of executing people can be guided towards a predetermined outcome, and that guidance will not always be visible whilst it is happening. That system condemned Jesus at night in a private house on testimony that contradicted itself, with a high priest who had disqualified himself mid-hearing. The Roman system had none of those constraints. It placed every decision in one man. No checks, no obligation to justify the outcome, no requirement that his verdict and his sentence point in the same direction. That system declared him innocent and then killed him. 2 trials, one night. The system designed to prevent wrongful execution produced one. The system with no such design declared him innocent and executed him anyway. What the earliest followers of Jesus said had happened in the days after the execution, what they staked everything on, is the question that we're not going to answer in this video. But the question starts here, in a private house after dark, with a high priest tearing his robes, and a Roman prefect who kept trying to find a way out.